Picture this: a wrecked farmhouse, smoke everywhere, and Sergeant Wilkes holding a mortar, his squad's fate in his hands. It's the dramatic opening to LNLT Point Blank's core second edition rulebook, throwing you right into the chaos of World War II combat.
Intense way to set the stage.
Yeah, and we're diving deep into those rules today. Not to actually play around, though. We're here to explore how Point Blank uses game mechanics to make history come alive.
It's fascinating how a game can be this unexpected lens to view history and strategy, right? You see things you wouldn't otherwise.
Exactly. So no plastic soldiers on a table today, but we'll unpack Point Blank's rulebook to see how it balances realism and gameplay.
That's good to me.
All right, so Point Blank keeps things streamlined, no super detailed miniatures. It's about cards, markers, and a really cool map board.
Oh, tell me about this map board. What makes it special?
Well, it's divided into sectors and areas, kind of like a grid system you'd see on an actual military map.
So like a tactical layout.
Yeah, exactly. Think back to Sergeant Wilkes in that opening scene. Knowing the terrain, those sectors, would have meant life or death. Understanding cover, lines of sight, that's what would have kept him and his squad alive.
Absolutely. Positioning is everything. And I bet that's where Section 3.2, Sectors and Ranges, comes into play.
You know this rule book.
I did my homework. This section emphasizes how crucial distance is to a weapon's effectiveness. Like imagine trying to take out a machine gun nest a couple of sectors away with just a rifle.
Talk about a bad day.
Right. Point Blank brings home the reality that, just like in real combat, where you are matters. Sometimes even more than what you're carrying.
It really makes you appreciate those split-second decisions soldiers had to make under pressure, with lives on the line.
No time to hesitate.
Exactly. But let's move on from the battlefield itself for a second. What about the units? Those are pretty important, right?
You can't have a war game without units. Point Blank features the usual suspects: infantry, vehicles, those heavy-hitting armored fighting vehicles, or AFVs for short, and then those specialized weapon teams.
So you've got your grunts, your tanks, and then those specialists with the really big guns.
You got it. Each card represents either a squad or a single vehicle.
Interesting. So how does Point Blank show that battles, they take a toll? That you don't just have endless waves of soldiers?
You're talking about attrition. That's where it gets interesting. You see, Point Blank distinguishes between full squads and half squads.
I like where this is going.
Right. Section 2.4 really emphasizes how, as the fight drags on, you lose men. Your unit's strength is going to reflect that.
It's a small detail, but it makes a huge difference in how you experience the game, I bet.
100%. It adds to the immersion and reminds you of the human cost of war,
Huh?
something a lot of games just kind of ignore.
Yeah, it's easy to get caught up in the strategy and forget that.
Absolutely. And it's not just about losing men either. Point Blank incorporates things like morale checks and fatigue.
Oh man, fatigue. We've all been there, right? Dragging yourself through a long day, barely functioning.
Exactly. Now imagine the exhaustion of being pinned down by enemy fire.
Or the mental strain of knowing every second could be your last.
Heavy stuff. And that's precisely what Section 7.6, fatigue, highlights. Even the toughest soldier at some point just can't keep going at 100%.
Makes sense. You hit a wall eventually.
Right. And in Point Blank, that fatigue, it affects everything.
Mm.
Your aim, your decision-making, the whole 9 yards. It's a reminder that this isn't just about moving pieces on a board.
There are real consequences to every action.
100%.
Now we've got to talk about those support weapons. Section 7.17, flamethrowers, man. Who doesn't love a good flamethrower?
Classic.
I mean, taking out a bunker with a burst of flames, come on, that's satisfying.
I can see the appeal, yeah.
But then there's that fuel check. You could be right in the middle of an assault and boom, out of fuel.
Talk about terrible timing.
Talk about a tactical nightmare.
Yeah, it's those little details. Resupply, fuel, even how many actions a unit can take before they're spent that really elevate Point Blank. You're not just rolling dice, you're managing resources, thinking ahead, just like a real commander would.
It's all coming together now. I'm liking what I'm hearing.
Oh, we're just getting started. Let's talk about some of the more unique mechanics. Remember all those cool little details we talked about? Well, get ready, because Point Blank gets even more clever with how it uses unique mechanics to create a truly immersive experience.
All right, I'm intrigued. Lay it on me. What kind of mechanics are we talking about here?
Let's dive into the world of buttoned versus unbuttoned AFEs, straight from Section 7.3 of the rulebook.
Okay, I'm already picturing tanks with little buttons, and I'm not sure I follow.
Yeah, it sounds a little strange at first, but it's Point Blank's ingenious way of highlighting the tough choices those tank crews faced. It's about protection versus firepower.
Interesting. So how does that translate into the game? What's the strategic difference between being buttoned up and, well, not?
Think of it this way. A buttoned-up AFV is like hunkering down inside during a blizzard. You're safe from the elements, or in this case, small arms fire, but your visibility is limited, right? You can't react as quickly.
So it's a trade-off. You're safer, but less aware of what's going on around you.
Precisely. Do you risk exposing yourself for better awareness and firepower, or do you play it safe and hope for the best? That's the dilemma Point Blank forces you to confront with every move.
I like it. Those tough choices make all the difference.
Absolutely. And speaking of tactical thinking, Section 7.4 on covered arcs really drives home the importance of battlefield awareness. It all comes down to simulating those limited fields of view that a tank crew would have had.
Right, because you can't see everything at once. It's like having blind spots.
Exactly. The rulebook uses a great example to illustrate this point. An M10 tank destroyer going up against a German Marder of Erst. If you can maneuver around the Marder and exploit its limited covered arc, you gain a major advantage. It's about focusing your attention, knowing where to look and when.
So flanking, surprise attacks, using the terrain to your advantage. It's amazing how these rules reflect actual military tactics.
All about strategy.
Okay, this next one, I have to admit, I chuckled a little when I first read it. Section 7.2, and I hope I'm pronouncing this right, bogging. Seriously.
Logging, yeah. You'd be surprised how many tank battles throughout history were influenced by something as simple as mud.
Wait, you're telling me a little rain could throw off an entire military operation?
Oh, absolutely. Especially on the Eastern Front during World War II, mud could bring even the most powerful tank to a standstill. Talk about vulnerable.
So even in a war game, you've got to factor in the environment.
Precisely. Point Blank understands that warfare isn't just about brute force. It's about adapting to the terrain, the weather, those unpredictable elements that can ruin the best laid plans.
It's about expecting the unexpected.
Exactly.
Now, we've covered some big mechanics here, but what about the smaller details? Like, what's the deal with heroes in Point Blank?
Ah, good catch. You're right, it's not just about the big picture stuff. As you're playing, you can actually create heroes based on those incredible acts of courage or tactical genius.
So it's like rewarding those clutch plays that turn the tide of battle.
You got it. Section 7.8, Hero Creation, lays it all out. It's Point Blank's way of simulating those moments of individual brilliance that can change everything. And then there's spotting, concealment, white phosphorus rounds, even rules for dealing with wrecked vehicles. I mean, the list goes on.
It sounds incredibly detailed, almost overwhelming.
It is, in the best way possible.
Mm-hmm.
It's about creating a truly immersive experience, where you're not just pushing pieces around a board, but stepping into the shoes of those who were there.
Right, you're not just playing a game, you're living it, at least in your mind.
Exactly.
But it does make you wonder, with all these mechanics, all this attention to detail, what's the takeaway? Why go to all this trouble to simulate something as complex, as brutal as war?
It's easy to get caught up in the weeds, right? You start focusing on all those tiny details, those rules, those mechanics, and you lose sight of the bigger picture.
But there is a bigger picture here, right? With a game like Point Blank, it can't just be about moving pieces around a board.
Absolutely not. For me, Point Blank is more than just a game. It's a way to connect with history, to understand it on a deeper level. It's a thought experiment, a challenge.
So you're saying it's about more than just the outcome of the game, it's about the decisions you make along the way.
Exactly. And those decisions, they can teach us a lot, not just about history, but about ourselves. Just like those soldiers in World War II, you're constantly forced to think tactically. You've got to anticipate your opponent, manage those resources, make the most of what you've got.
Just like in real life, right? Limited resources, unexpected challenges.
Exactly. Whether you're running a business, negotiating a deal, or even just trying to get through a tough day, those skills are invaluable. Point Blank just gives you a unique way to practice them.
It's like a mental workout disguised as a war game.
And a history lesson all rolled into one. But there's another side to Point Blank that I think is really important too. It doesn't shy away from the human cost of war.
We talked about that earlier with the fatigue rules, right?
Right. And the morale checks. Even the way a unit can be reduced in strength. These mechanics, they remind you that we're not just talking about abstract units on a map. We're talking about people. People making impossible decisions under unimaginable pressure.
It's a side of war that's easy to forget, especially when we're looking back from a position of relative safety.
Absolutely. But Point Blank, it puts you right there in the trenches, forcing you to see the conflicts from a whole new perspective. You're not just reading about history. You're experiencing it, feeling it.
Which brings us full circle back to Sergeant Wilkes, hunkered down, that lone mortar round in his hands. Knowing what we know now about the importance of positioning, those split-second decisions, would we have made the same call?
That's the question point blank makes you ask. It's not about judging right or wrong. It's about understanding the complexity of those choices, the weight of those decisions.
It's a powerful reminder that history is more than just dates and names in a textbook. It's about the stories of those who lived through it.
And maybe, just maybe, by exploring those stories, by putting ourselves in their shoes, we can learn to navigate our own challenges with a little more wisdom, a little more compassion.
Well said. I think this deep dive has given us a lot to think about. It's amazing how a tabletop war game can do that, isn't it?
You never know where you'll find those moments of insight.
That's the truth. To everyone listening, if you ever get the chance to experience LNLT point blank, I highly recommend it. You might be surprised at what you discover, not just about history, but about yourself.